When I bought my house here in the Dominican Republic, it gave me a front row seat to all the individual charges and fees and everything else that you have to pay in order to close on the property, to close on a mortgage, and then of course the recurring expenses of living and owning a property here in the Dominican Republic. So in today's video, I want to go through all of the individual costs at different phases of ownership. First, at closing, and I'll add on closing with a mortgage. Second, the ongoing costs. And third, exit costs. Then I'm going to give you an example with all the numbers so you can see what it might look like for a property you're purchasing. Let's dive in. All right, I jotted down all the closing costs that it will take when you purchase a property here in the Dominican Republic. Let me be clear, this is if you're not purchasing a Confotor approved property, which would waive a whole bunch of taxes. That program is still out there, but it's less frequent, so we're gonna go with non-Confotor for everything we talk about today. Here's the three major costs you need to consider at closing. First is a transfer tax, and that is going to be 3% of the purchase price of the property. Next are attorney fees. Now, you don't have to get an attorney. I would recommend highly that you do. I did. I think it's smart to have one, and that attorney will charge you 1 to 2% of the purchase price of the property. And last, there's just miscellaneous fees that popped up. I mean, I put $500. It's probably much less than that. It's probably only like $100 or $200, but when you're paying the transfer tax and attorney fees, it feels like a little bit extra, but just be aware, there's a few extra admin fees that'll pop up. Now, if you are planning to get a mortgage on the property that you're buying, there's a few other fees to consider in addition to these. The first is if you use a mortgage broker. I did. You'll pay 1 to 2% of the loan amount to the mortgage broker as the buyer. Now, mortgages, to be clear, are not available on a pre-construction property until it's completed. So if you're looking to get a mortgage, either you're buying a resale property or your pre-construction property is complete, and whatever balance you owe to the developer, you're gonna get a mortgage to pay for that. So again, if you use a broker, you don't need to, 1 to 2%. Second is a mortgage tax of 2%. And this typically, from what I've seen, gets rolled into the mortgage, so you don't pay it up front, but be advised, it's there. And then third, I put legal fees. I remember paying, it might've been like only 100 or 150 bucks. I just put 250 for good measure, additional legal fees. All of these together will add up for the totality of your closing. If you have a mortgage, obviously these add on to it. So before we go into holding costs and exit costs, let's make this real with a real example. Let's say you're buying a property for $200,000, and that's the total cost of buying it. So we'll take your $200,000 and we'll apply all of these taxes and see what we come up with. So 3% of $200,000 is $6,000. I said attorney fees are 1 to 2%. Typically, the higher the price, the lower the percentage. But let's just say you negotiate a 1.5% attorney fee on this. Let's see, 1% would be $2,000, so 1.5% would be $3,000. And then finally, you've got this $500 worth of admin fees for a grand total of $9,500 in upfront costs just to close on a $200,000 property. Now, let's say you add on a mortgage. You've got your $200,000 property. If it's pre-construction, let's just say you paid half of it off with the developer and you owe $100,000 more now that your project's completed, or you're buying resale, and we'll just, for the sake of argument, say you're putting 50% down, $100,000 down, you're gonna finance $100,000. Let's start with the broker. At a $100,000 mortgage, you would have to pay the broker 2%, which would be $2,000. Now, you don't need to pay this broker. You don't need to have a broker. You can go directly to the bank. And in fact, the broker that I use has a minimum of $2,000 fee. So, even if you have a $80,000 or $70,000 mortgage, you're going to pay $2,000 to them for them to get you a mortgage. For me personally, the bank system and going for a mortgage directly with the bank was a massive headache. So we're talking months and months of back and forth. It was crazy. For me, it would be worth paying the $2,000 or whatever the amount is of the mortgage, 1 to 2% of that, in order to have the broker handle that process and not deal with the bank. That's me. You don't need to, but I'm going to add it in here, 2% of $100,000 or $2,000. The next is the mortgage tax, which would be 2% of that $100,000. We'll put $2,000, but again, that's going to be in the mortgage more than likely. Again, everything in DR is 80% true, meaning you talk to 10 people, 8 of them will tell you it went this way, and 2 will tell you a completely different experience. It's just the way it is. And lastly, you have these $250 worth of legal fees. So in total, that would mean $4,250 in mortgage fees, but only $2,250 of that you'd have to come up with upfront when you close. So when you add this $9,500 in total closing costs to the $2,250 of out-of-pocket upfront expense that you're going to have, that total, I need a calculator for this one. The camera's providing pressure. I gotta be right. Would be $11,750 upfront in order to acquire this $200,000 property with a mortgage. Without the mortgage, you would just have the $9,500. And again, if you have a Confotor property, you can get rid of this $6,000 because you won't be charged that transfer tax, and you would owe just the $3,000 in attorney fees and the $500 worth of miscellaneous fees upfront. And then if you did get a mortgage later, all of these charges would apply. All right, the other thing to consider, the last one kind of upfront, is the price of furniture. Now, it's kind of obvious if you're buying your own property that's resale that you're gonna have to furnish the place, right? But know this, when you're furnishing a place in the Dominican Republic that's resale, it's not the same as the United States. In the US, anything that's sort of attached stays in the home. That means light fixtures, toilets, appliances, like a stove, dishwasher, all that stuff stays. Here, it doesn't necessarily. While toilets may stay, I've seen people take toilet seats when they move. Yeah, but not only do you need couches and chairs, and I mean, you can see this room's still a mess. We're still kind of moving into this house, this room at least. We also needed to buy light fixtures that hang from the ceiling. We needed to buy an oven, stove, a range, whatever you call it. Now, if you're buying pre-construction, many of the developers will sell you a package, a furniture package, and it's going to be marked up. For what might be $7,000 to $8,000 worth of furniture, they'll probably charge $15,000. Again, kind of like the mortgage broker and paying them, it's a convenience fee that you can charge. And granted, I mean, if you were to go to one store, you might get closer to that $15,000, but if you pieced it out and you had the time to do it, you could probably get it way cheaper than buying the package. But you know, again, to each their own, whatever's convenient for you. But it is an additional upfront cost to consider. All right, now that we've closed on our property, there are holding costs, whether you plan to live in the home, Airbnb it, or long-term rent it. I'm just gonna give you kind of all the closing costs to consider here. I mentioned furniture, that's up front, but this front here is probably the biggest one, and this is a very popular feature here in DR, and that is the HOA. The HOA, or they call it maintenance here, is really for the developer, their recurring revenue model. It's like how they make money on an ongoing basis. And the rates of HOAs here have gone up. If you're buying in a place like Cap Cana, Vista Cana here in Punta Cana, they're going anywhere usually from $1 to $2 per square meter for an HOA every month. I've seen them as high as $3. So what does that mean? If you buy a condo in Vista Cana or Cap Cana, that's 150 square meters, which would be the equivalent of about 1,500 square feet. So 80 square meters, 800 square feet, 200 square meters, 2,000 square feet, if that makes sense. Then on your 150 square meter condo that you bought in Cap Cana, you're gonna pay between $150 and $300 per month, $1 to $2 per square meter per month in HOA fees. Could be as high as $450. It depends on a lot of variables. For your 80 square meter property, you pay between $80 and $160 per month, maybe a little more depending on the rate, but you get the point. Ironically, in some place like Punta Cana Village, which houses sell for $800,000 to $1.2 million, your HOA is only about $150 to $250. Go figure. But in many of the developments I see, City Place, Vista Cana, Cap Cana, and many more, the HOA adds up. In fact, look, I bought a piece of land up in the town of Magua next to Meaches in a project called Legacy Meaches. And the HOA I'm gonna pay is hundreds of dollars a month. I kind of know that. I just want to own land up there. I'm planning for that expense. But HOAs are real. And in the Punta Cana area, there's really nowhere you're gonna buy that doesn't have them. As you get around the country, if you buy land in the middle of nowhere, then sure, you can build and you won't have an HOA. But any development in Sosua, in Santo Domingo, in Punta Cana is going to have HOA fees. And by the way, before I even continue, I always want to make this disclaimer. I'm not a professional. I'm sharing my own experiences and what I hear. For whatever it is you're going to buy, make sure to consult your attorney, consult your realtor, talk to your developer, all of that. I just hope videos like this give you a sense of some things to look out for. It just arms you with information that you can use to the best of your ability as you consider or even decide to buy in DR. All right, the second expense is electricity. And if you're gonna be anywhere in the Punta Cana area, this is more than most people realize. We have a house that has air conditioning in every bedroom, not in the main room downstairs. Our electric bill per month running 2 rooms AC at night only, and I'll admit right now as I sit here, I'm running that AC, but it'll only be on for like an hour, is going to be between $300 and $400 per month. In a place like Cap Cana, where Cap Cana owns the electricity, they actually mark it up even more. Now, to be clear, where I live, they own the community owns the electricity as well. But what I see price-wise, it's more similar to what people that don't live in this community pay. Cap Cana tends to be a little bit higher. But even in the whole of Punta Cana, you'd be maybe a little bit surprised by the amount of electricity, so just plan for it. Find out, learn, and understand how much it might be. A lot of people have questions about solar. Another video, I'll talk about that. Another one, if you're Airbnb or maybe long-term renting, is Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is probably gonna run you $30 to $40 a month for good Wi-Fi here. It's not too bad. Could pay more, you could pay a little less, but for decent Wi-Fi, that's probably gonna be what it is. And then if you're doing any sort of property manager, if it's a long-term rental, maybe it's 10% of the rent, meaning you're renting it to somebody forever, or you don't have one at all because you do it yourself. If it's short term, I've seen rates anywhere from 15 to 25%. So it's an ongoing expense you're going to want to consider. The next one is property tax, or IPI, the IPI tax, which is going to be 1% of the value of the home or property if it's held personally in your name above about it's about $170-ish thousand in value. So in this $200,000 property example, you'd be taxed 1% of everything above $170,000, which is $30,000, which is $300 a year. Again, Confitor will wipe that out if it is a Confitor property, but it's just something to be mindful of. You do owe that if you're holding it in your name. Now, conversely, if you decide you're going to put it into a Dominican SRL or a US LLC, which are essentially the same thing, it's just DR in the United States, you got to register either one with the Dominican government, then you're going to pay a 1% asset tax on the value of everything inside of that SRL, which means on this $200,000 property, if you hold it in an SRL or an LLC, you're going to pay $2,000 per year as an asset tax. You don't pay a property tax, you pay an asset tax. So for you, talk to your accountant, to your lawyer, what's the best structure for you? It really depends, but just know that if it's held in your name, you pay a property tax. If it's held in your SRL, you pay the asset tax. And if you're paying in your name as a property tax, you get the first $170,000 in value or so. I think it's 10 million pesos, something like that. No tax on that. You pay only 1% above that amount. Now, I did a whole other video on taxes that deep dive this, and I'll link that at the end of the video so you have a sense of like if you hold it in one versus the other, what that looks like. But generally speaking, these are your holding costs: HOA, electric, Wi-Fi, property management, and then whatever tax you're going to pay annually. Then at the end, you've got exit taxes. If you sell the property, you're going to have two things to consider. It might be more, but these are the two that jump to mind. The first, capital gains. Capital gains here is going to be taxed at probably about 25%. There's a little bit of nuance in, is it held in an SRL? Is it held personally? Yada, yada, yada. Let's just say 25-ish%. My understanding on cap gains is it is the gain less any improvements. So let's say you're going to sell this property for $250,000, but you put another $20,000 in it that you could show tangibly. You added value to the property with $20,000. The $50,000 gain isn't where you'd be taxed. You'd be taxed for $30,000. $250 minus the $200 minus the $20 that you added value to the property. Again, I haven't been through this process, so again, talk to your lawyer, talk to your realtor. My understanding is it's doable to show expenses that you put into the property to offset your gain, but I think it has to be really, really well documented. And the second is going to be your agent commission if you're selling this property. Usually in the 5 to 7% range is what you pay an agent. So on this $250,000 property, or it's worth now $250,000 that you're selling it for, you're going to pay somewhere between $12,000 and $17,000 in agent commissions to get rid of the property. Now, look, if you're wondering how do I get more information on this and all of that, the best thing I can tell you is my DR Inner Circle is a great spot to engage with other people, specifically on this topic around taxes. In fact, we have a tax strategy chat within the Inner Circle where people engage and talk. There's professionals in there that talk about their experiences, and I even bring on tax experts as guests on my Tuesday Q&A call so that our members can get all the insights that they need. Add on to that monthly office hours with an attorney who could talk about tax implications on real estate business and you name it. Again, I'm not your expert. All I know is what I've learned, and then I share it with you, and I hope that you go out and find the right experts, but I can expose you to some folks that have expertise inside the Inner Circle. JamieGruber.com if you want to check it out. I hope that helps. So I drafted this scenario, and I went through and had all the math done for me on, okay, if I buy this property for $200,000, and 5 years later, I'm going to sell it for $275,000. And I assumed $1,500 per month in income, which might be long-term, meaning you're renting it full-time for $1,500 a month, or for this $200,000 condo, maybe you're doing $125 to $150 a night for 10 to 15 nights a month. Depending on where you buy it, that's possible, whatever. I calculated in all of the closing costs, plus a $15,000 furniture package that I'm buying in this fictional scenario when I buy the property. I'm holding it in an SRL, so I'm going to pay the 1% asset tax, and I'm writing down expenses like these monthly expenses we talked about, but also other business expenses that I can reasonably write off against the property to mitigate my income tax burden. And what I came up with was this. Over the hold of 5 years, I would generate, based on all these numbers that I put in there, without boring you on the specifics, because I think the outcome makes sense, my overall return over 5 years, about 19%. My annual return would be 3.5% to 4%. Now, I think that's conservative, but there's also people out there saying 9, 10, 11, 12% annually, and I'm sure people get that. But somewhere between that 4.5% and 6.5% is generally what I see and hear being a more bankable rate of return annually. And then you need to decide, is that worth it to you? There might be other factors in this, like, I'm not going to sell, so I want to keep this long term. I'm going to retire in this property. I want to use it a few times a year and own my own thing. I want to leave it to my kids. That's a motivation for me with some of the property that we purchased. But you're buying something that gives you sort of like a bond-like return, not James Bond, like bonds. bond rate. And you have to consider the other variables of ownership for you. Look, down below, I put together a PDF outlining all of these different expenses for you. If you want to download that, click the link and I'll send it to your inbox. Totally free. It's yours to use. I just think it's a good thing to bring to your attorney or realtor and go through and just double check, like, hey, all of these, what are the charges? What do I need to worry about? Are there some things not on this that I need to think about? Are there some things on this that I don't need to pay because I'm confrator or I don't have an attorney or whatever it might be? Now, over on my main channel, I did this video breaking down income and property and asset taxes and everything. If you're a US citizen and buying in the Dominican Republic in particular, that should be a particular interest to you. Check that out. Check out the inner circle at jamiegruber.com, and I'll see you on the next one.